Hey, Grandpa, you lost on your way to the nursing home. The biker's voice, raw like rusted metal, sliced through the night. He was flanked by three others, their engines rumbling a low threat. The leader, a brute with a scarred face, eyed Jason Statham's gleaming motorcycle. They saw a lone, 60-year-old man in a worn leather jacket, an easy target in the forgotten Rustbelt District. A predator's smirk spread across the leader's face as his hand reached for a heavy chain. But they didn't see the chilling stillness in the old man's eyes. Before I show you the brutal efficiency that unfolded next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The air was thick with the promise of violence, hanging heavy over the cracked asphalt. The Rustbelt District was a graveyard of industry, a place where the city's pulse had flatlined decades ago. The night air carried a unique scent, a mix of faint disinfectant, cheap cigar smoke from a nearby dive bar, and the ever-present ghost of motor oil seeped into the very concrete. Here, hope was a currency scarcer than clean water. Jason Statham moved through this forgotten landscape with a quiet purpose that seemed alien to the surroundings. He just spent the afternoon at a youth boxing gym a few miles away, a charity project he funded anonymously, trying to hammer discipline into kids the world had written off. His stride was even economical, a product of a life where wasted motion could mean the difference between breathing and not. His iconic bald head caught the sickly yellow glow of a buzzing LED strip above a 24-hour convenience store. He pushed the grimy glass door open, a small bell announcing his entry with a pathetic, tinny jingle. Inside, the flickering lights cast long, dancing shadows over aisles packed with desperation. Off-brand energy drinks, dusty cans of chili, bags of stale chips, and a wall of bottom-shelf liquor behind a plexiglass shield. Statham navigated the narrow space with a predator's grace, his worn but high-quality leather jacket creaking softly. He picked up a bottle of sparkling water, a packet of beef jerky, and a single green apple, placing them on the counter. The clerk, a man whose age was impossible to guess beneath layers of perpetual anxiety, had thinning gray hair and hands that trembled as he scanned the items. His eyes kept darting towards the front window, towards the familiar, guttural rumble of approaching motorcycles. "Be safe out there," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper above the hum of a rusty ventilation fan. "The Iron Crows, they've been getting bolder. They don't care who they hurt." Statham gave a slow, deliberate nod, his gaze unreadable. He didn't need the warning. His senses, honed by years in environments far more dangerous than this, had already picked up on the shift in the night's rhythm. He felt the predatory eyes on him before he even saw them. He paid in cash, pocketed the change, and slung the small plastic bag over his wrist. As he stepped back onto the cracked sidewalk, they materialized from a dark side street. For motorcycles, their engines growling like starved wolves. They formed a loose, menacing semicircle, cutting off any path of escape. The riders wore black leather vests with the insignia of the Iron Crows stitched on the back, a mechanical raven's claw clutching a rusted cog. They were the kings of this forgotten kingdom, ruling through fear and casual brutality. The leader swung a thick leg off his bike. He was a mountain of a man, built from cheap beer and bad intentions. He pulled off his helmet to reveal a face bisected by a jagged scar that ran from his eyebrow to his chin. A heavy motorcycle chain, with a spark plug welded to the end, hung from his belt. This was Scrap, the undisputed alpha of the crew. His eyes, small and cruel, locked on Statham. A slow, ugly smirk spread across his lips. Well, look what the cat dragged in," he snarled, his voice a gravelly mockery. The other three crows chuckled, their faces hidden behind dark visors. "Hey, Grandpa, you lost on your way to the nursing home?" Scrap took a step forward, the chain clinking with a sinister rhythm against his thigh. "That's a nice bike you got there. Looks a little too clean for this neighborhood. How about you leave the keys and that little bag of snacks, and we let you hobble home before your bedtime?" The threat was layered with condescending amusement. From across the street, a teenager instinctively raised his phone, the screen's glow illuminating his nervous face as he hit record. Inside the store, the clerk ducked below the counter, his heart hammering against his ribs. Statham remained perfectly still. His posture was relaxed, shoulders loose, but an aura of immense, contained energy radiated from him. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the four men in a single, fluid motion. He wasn't seeing bikers. He was seeing threat vectors, assessing ranges, postures, and the subtle tells of their aggression. 4 targets. Leader is overconfident, trying to intimidate. The 2 on the flanks are followers, hesitant. The one on the right is twitchy, likely the first to act. He shifted the bag on his wrist slightly. "You have 3 seconds," he said. His voice was low, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. It carried a chilling finality that cut through the engine noise. For a fraction of a second, Scrap's smirk faltered. The quiet authority was something he didn't expect, but his pride, bolstered by the laughter of his men, quickly resurfaced. 3 seconds, he roared. "The only mistake I see is you breathing our air, old man. This is our turf." The air crackled, the moment stretching into a taut wire of anticipation. Scrap, infuriated by the lack of fear in Statham's eyes, decided to make an example of him. He unhooked the heavy chain from his belt, the metal links slithering through his gloved hand with a dry, menacing rattle. "I'm going to teach you some respect, Grandpa," he growled, taking another heavy step forward. The twitchy rider on the right, spurred on by his leader's aggression, simultaneously drew a wicked-looking trench knife, its brass knuckles gleaming under the streetlight. He started to circle around Statham's flank, aiming for a pincer attack. For any other person, this would have been the moment of sheer panic. 2 armed attackers closing in, 2 more ready on their bikes. The teenager filming audibly gasped, his phone trembling. But Statham didn't react with fear. He reacted with geometry and physics. Primary threat: knife. Secondary: chain. Angles are poor. Exploit it. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, he moved. It wasn't a panic scramble. It was an explosion of brutal efficiency. He didn't step back from Scrap. He stepped towards a knife-wielding biker. The sudden, aggressive movement caught the man completely off guard. Before the knife could even complete its upward arc, Statham's left hand shot out like a piston, not grabbing the man's wrist, but striking the inside of his elbow joint. A sickening, wet crunch echoed in the night. The biker shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure agony, as his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The trench knife clattered uselessly onto the pavement. Statham's right hand followed through in the same fluid motion, the heel of his palm connecting solidly with the man's temple. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Scrap froze mid-swing, his chain halfway through its arc, his brain struggling to process the impossible speed he had just witnessed. The other 2 crows sat motionless on their bikes, stunned into silence. The teenager's phone camera, which had wobbled, now focused with renewed intensity. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words of breathless prayer. Statham pivoted back toward Scrap, his expression unchanged. He was a statue of cold fury. The leader's overconfidence had evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. But rage quickly smothered it. With a guttural roar, he swung the chain in a wide, horizontal arc, aiming to break Statham's ribs. It was a powerful but predictable attack. Statham didn't retreat. He flowed forward, ducking under the whistling chain. As the metal links passed harmlessly over his head, he rose up inside Scrap's guard. His left fist, held vertically, drove upwards into the leader's solar plexus. The air rushed out of Scrap's lungs in a choked gasp. His entire body seized up, his eyes bulging with shock and pain. He was a big man, but the strike had bypassed his muscle and hit the nerve cluster with surgical precision. As he doubled over, gagging for air, Statham's right hand came up, not in a punch, but as a rigid blade, striking the side of Scrap's neck. The leader of the Iron Crows went down hard, landing in a heap next to his fallen comrade, the chain spilling from his limp fingers. 2 down. The street fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of the remaining 2 motorcycles and the pained groans of the men on the ground. The 2 remaining bikers exchanged a panicked look. This wasn't a robbery anymore. It was a slaughter. One of them, deciding he'd seen enough, gunned his engine, ready to flee. But the other, either braver or more foolish, let out a yell of fury. He twisted the handlebars of his bike and charged directly at Statham, turning the half-ton machine into a battering ram. The engine screamed as it accelerated. The crowd, which had started to peek out from their hiding places, scattered again in terror. The teenager filming flinched but held his ground. Statham stood his ground, watching the approaching headlights like a matador facing a bull. At the very last instant, as the front wheel was about to hit him, he pivoted on the ball of his foot with impossible grace. The bike roared past him, missing by inches. As it did, his hand shot out, grabbing the rider's leather vest. With a powerful, leveraging twist of his entire body, he ripped the man clean off the moving motorcycle. The rider flew through the air, landing with a sickening thud, while his now riderless bike wobbled for a few feet before crashing into a dumpster with a deafening clang of metal. The last biker stared in pure horror. He dropped his bike and ran, scrambling into the darkness without a backward glance. The battle was over, or so it seemed. Scrap, pushing himself up on one elbow, his face a mask of humiliation and agony, spat a string of curses. This isn't over," he wheezed, pointing a trembling finger at Statham. "You have no idea who you just messed with. We'll be back for you." Statham simply looked down at him, his gaze as cold and unforgiving as a winter grave. He adjusted his leather jacket, his breathing perfectly steady. The promise of retaliation hung in the air, a dark cloud on the horizon. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of defeat. 3 iron crows lay groaning on the asphalt amidst the wreckage of a toppled motorcycle, while the 4th had vanished into the night. Scrap's threat, though delivered from a position of weakness, carried a venomous weight. It wasn't a plea, it was a promise. Statham knew this kind of pride. It was a cancer that, when wounded, only grew back more aggressively. He didn't relax. He simply stood, a silent sentinel in the center of the chaos he had so cleanly orchestrated, his senses scanning the surrounding darkness. The night was far from over. The teenager, emboldened by the sudden silence, stepped out from behind a parked car, his phone still recording. "That was insane," he breathed, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "They're gonna come back, man. They're gonna come back with more guys." Statham's gaze flickered towards him for a moment, a silent acknowledgement, before returning to the dark alleys that bled into the main street. He could already hear it, a low, distant rumble, different from the earlier engines. This was the sound of more bikes, and they were approaching fast. The people who had started to emerge from their hiding spots heard it too. A collective wave of dread washed over them, extinguishing the fledgling sparks of hope. The clerk inside the convenience store, who had been peering over the counter, slumped back down in despair. Scrap heard it too, and a broken, triumphant grin split his bruised face. "You hear that, old man?" He coughed, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. "That's the rest of my boys. You're dead. You're dead." From 2 separate side streets, the reinforcements arrived. It wasn't a large group, but they were different. 2 more bikes roared into the dim light, their movements more disciplined, more menacing. They didn't hoot or holler. They were silent, their presence radiating a cold professionalism that the first group had lacked. One rider, tall and wiry, dismounted with a coiled chain wrapped around his forearm. His helmet remained on, its dark visor making him an anonymous instrument of vengeance. The other rider stayed on his bike, idling it a few feet away, and in his hand, he held something that changed the entire equation. It wasn't a knife or a chain. It was a pistol, a semi-automatic, its dark metal finish absorbing the faint streetlight, making it look like a hole in reality. The sight of the gun sent a fresh shockwave of panic through the onlookers. This was no longer a street fight. It was an execution. Gasps turned into muffled screams as people scrambled for cover. True terror finally setting in. The teenager with the phone dropped to one knee behind a car, but he kept filming, his hand shaking so violently the image blurred. The gunman, his arms steady, pointed the weapon squarely at Statham's chest. "Drop it, old man." His voice, distorted and metallic through the helmet, echoed in the sudden, deathly silence. "Party's over. On your knees." Scrap let out a ragged, wheezing laugh of victory. "See? This is how it ends. This is the power of the Iron Crows." Statham's eyes were fixed on the pistol. His posture didn't change. He remained deceptively relaxed, but every muscle in his body was coiled, ready. Distance, 20 feet. Shooter is confident, finger on the trigger. Second threat has the chain, waiting for an opening. The gun is the only thing that matters. He slowly, deliberately began to raise his hands, a classic sign of surrender. The gunman chuckled, a grating metallic sound. "That's better, Grandpa." Now, he never finished the sentence. Statham's surrender was a feint, a tactic to create a microsecond of complacency. The moment the gunman's focus softened, Statham exploded into motion. It was a blur of speed that defied his age. In one powerful movement, he kicked a discarded trench knife from the ground. The blade spun through the air like a shuriken, not aimed at the gunman, but at the headlight of his motorcycle. The glass shattered with a loud pop, plunging the gunman into relative darkness. It was the perfect distraction. In that same instant, Statham lunged forward, covering the 20 feet in a series of powerful, ground-eating strides. The gunman, startled by the headlight shattering, fired. The crack of the pistol was deafening. The bullet sparked harmlessly against the pavement, inches from where Statham had been a split second before. Before he could fire again, Statham was on him, his hand clamped down on the weapon, not trying to wrestle it away, but twisting it violently sideways, breaking the shooter's wrist with a sharp, audible snap. The man screamed inside his helmet as the gun was torn from his grasp. Statham didn't stop. He drove his shoulder hard into the man's chest, knocking him and his bike over in a tangled mess of chrome and leather. The second man with the chain rushed forward, swinging the heavy metal in a vicious arc. Statham, having already spun away from the fallen gunman, met the attack head-on. He let the chain wrap around his forearm, and instead of resisting, he pulled, using the man's own momentum to drag him off balance. As the biker stumbled forward, Statham drove a brutal elbow strike into the side of his helmet. The impact made a dull, resonant thud, and the man collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. The street fell silent once more, the only sound the pained whimpers of the defeated. The fight was over. For good this time. The silence that followed was profound, deeper than before. It was the silence of disbelief, of a reality that had been violently rewritten. The gunman lay tangled in his own motorcycle, moaning, his wrist shattered. His partner was a motionless heap on the pavement. The once feared Iron Crows were utterly broken, scattered like discarded toys at the feet of a single 60-year-old man. Then the sound began. It started as a single, hesitant clap from behind a dumpster. Then another. Then a voice shouted, "Yeah." And suddenly, the street erupted. A wave of cheers, shouts, and applause washed over the scene. A cathartic release of years of pent-up fear and frustration. People emerged from behind cars, from doorways, their faces lit with a mixture of shock and elation. The phones that had been recording out of fear were now held high like victory banners, capturing the image of their silent protector. Scrap, the leader, pushed himself against the lamppost, his eyes wide with a horror that had finally eclipsed his rage. All his power, all his intimidation, had turned to dust in a matter of minutes. His reinforcements were defeated, his gang humiliated. He looked at Statham, who now stood, breathing calmly, the captured pistol held loosely in his hand. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a primal, pleading terror. "Please," he rasped, the word a pathetic croak. "Don't. I'm sorry. We'll leave. We'll never come back. Just please." Statham walked towards him, his footsteps the only sound that could cut through the crowd's cheers. He stopped just before the broken leader, his shadow engulfing him. He bent down slightly, his voice low and devoid of emotion, yet carrying to every corner of the street. "This was never about you," he said, the words sharp as broken glass. "It was about them." He gestured with his head towards the crowd of residents. "You didn't rule this neighborhood. You just haunted it. And tonight, the ghosts are gone." He dropped the pistol's magazine, ejected the chambered round, and tossed the empty weapon and the slide separately into a nearby sewer grate, where they vanished with two distinct splashes. With a final, dismissive look, he turned his back on Scrap and walked away, leaving the man to stew in the ruins of his pathetic empire. A woman rushed forward, the same one from an apartment window, and offered him a bottle of water. "Thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave us our home back." Statham took it with a slight nod. "It was always yours," he replied, his voice softened now. "You just have to remember that." Within hours, the Rustbelt District became the center of a digital firestorm. The teenagers' footage, raw and shaky, went viral. It was picked up by news outlets, reaction channels, and social media aggregators worldwide. Hashtags like hashtag #RustbeltTrumbull and hashtag Grandpa Statham trended for days. Analysts debated his fighting style. News anchors replayed the moment he disarmed the gunman on a loop, and the world became obsessed with the mysterious, unassuming hero. But in the district itself, the change was more profound than any viral trend. The transformation was almost immediate. The next evening, the sidewalks weren't empty. Families sat on their stoops. Teenagers played music from portable speakers. The convenience store clerk no longer flinched at the sound of a backfiring car. The Iron Crows were gone, their power shattered not just by physical defeat, but by the public humiliation they had suffered. Fear had lost its grip. A few days later, the young man who had filmed everything found Statham sitting on a park bench, quietly eating a green apple. He approached nervously, his phone in his hand. "Sir," he started, his voice cracking with admiration. "Everyone's calling you a hero. But I just wanted to ask. You could have, finish them. Why didn't you?" Statham took a slow bite of the apple before answering, his gaze fixed on the children playing in the distance. "There's a difference between a protector and a punisher," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Breaking things is easy. Any thug can do that. The real strength is measured by what you can hold together, by what you can protect." He stood up, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder for a brief moment. The fight wasn't about hurting them. It was about reminding these people they didn't have to be afraid anymore. He then turned and walked away, his solitary figure melting into the cityscape, leaving behind not a monument or a name, but a legacy written in the newfound laughter and courage of a neighborhood reborn. This wasn't just a story about a fight. It was about the anatomy of fear. It shows that the power of any bully, any gang, or any oppressor isn't in their fists, but in the silence of those they terrorize. One act of defiance, one person who refuses to bow, can shatter that illusion, reminding us that courage, once ignited, becomes a wildfire that fear can never truly extinguish. Have you ever witnessed a moment where one person's courage completely changed the atmosphere of a situation? What would you have done if you were the one holding the camera, watching this unfold from a distance? Do you think true strength lies in the ability to inflict damage or in a restraint to protect? It's a question that defines the difference between a warrior and a brute, and it's something we should all consider in our own lives. If this story reminded you that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about hidden strength and quiet courage. Share this with someone who needs to remember that it only takes one person to stand up and make a difference. We read every single comment, so let us know your thoughts. More stories about unlikely heroes and street justice are waiting for you on the screen right now. Click on one of those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another incredible story that proves you should never judge a book by its cover.